Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. Have you ever just stopped and wondered what exactly makes human societies tick? Like, why do some communities build these incredibly deep communal bonds while others are just all about fierce individualism? Well, it turns out it all comes down to this fascinating and largely invisible interplay between our environment, the tools we invent, and honestly, how we put food on the table. Today, we're diving into the idea that we are completely shaped by our physical spaces and our technology.
Okay, let's take a super quick look at our roadmap. We'll kick things off with nature, culture, and society, then dive into India's ecological harmony. After that, we'll hit the technological disruption, see how we're adapting to the machine, and finally dig into the roots of agriculture.
To really wrap our heads around this, we're going to bypass all the heavy academic jargon and just start right at the very foundation of human communities. Let's look at how our world is literally built from the ground up. Starting off with Section 1, Nature, Culture, and Society. Let's look at the absolute base of our triangle, ecology, and how the physical world straight up dictates how we build our communities.
So, social ecology. Basically, it proves that society isn't just a bunch of people hanging out. It's people intimately interacting with their specific physical space, and the wealth hidden right there in the dirt. As sociologists point out, it's the science of how physical and cultural conditions directly mold our behavior. We are, quite literally, inextricably bound to the ground we walk on.
Now, we can look at this relationship through two completely different lenses. First, you've got social ecology, which is all about power and resources. Think of a bamboo forest, right? A forest department looks at that bamboo and sees massive industrial revenue. But a local artisan, they look at the exact same bamboo and see the material they need to weave baskets just to survive. That is a prime example of social and environmental inequality. Cultural ecology, on the other hand, which was pioneered by anthropologist Julian Stewart, looks at how we adapt our daily living and eating habits to actually survive whatever physical environment we happen to be born into.
Sociologist Mencken actually broke this whole concept down into four foundational pillars that essentially hold up any human society. You've got the environment, the population makeup, the settlement or housing conditions, and the economic system. And here's the wild part. If you change just one of these pillars, like, say, shifting your economy from hunting and gathering to specialized factory work, the entire structure of that society completely transforms.
Moving right along to Section 2, India's ecological harmony. Let's take these concepts and apply them to a real-world example by looking at one of the oldest, most resilient cultural ecologies on the planet.
India is honestly the ultimate case study. Its ability to adapt to its environment over thousands and thousands of years has created this incredibly unique cultural ecology. We're talking profound antiquity. It survived while the ancient cultures of Egypt and Babylon faded away. And it did that through tolerance and coordination, historically absorbing diverse groups instead of breaking under pressure. It's a culture that heavily prioritizes spiritualism over material indulgence. And ultimately, it achieves this brilliant unity and diversity, maintaining social cohesion despite just immense geographic and social differences across the subcontinent.
To actually manage such a complex environment, ancient mystics came up with the ashram system. It breaks down a theoretical 100-year human life into 4 distinct steps for mental and spiritual development. First, you learn. Then, you raise a family. Next, you gradually withdraw from duties, and finally, you completely renounce worldly ties. And you know, this wasn't just a religious practice, it was a highly structured ecological adaptation. It ensured society functioned smoothly across generations without completely draining the local resources.
All right, on to Section 3, the technological disruption. So what happens when a culture actually reaches a state of total harmony with its environment, but then a massive disruptor enters the chat? Enter the second side of our triangle, technology. As the sociologist Veblen argued, new technology is born out of our basic needs, sure, but it violently shakes up the old habits we just spent thousands of years perfecting. We are heavily controlled by habits forged by our environment. So when you just drop a steam engine or, a microchip into that environment, human behavior is forced to rapidly change.
And that brings us to the core friction of the modern era. Traditional institutions simply cannot coordinate with the lightning-fast pace of new technology. A fierce struggle kicks off between ancient customs and new mechanical realities. And according to historical data, the new values almost inevitably win out, mostly for the sake of societal progress and sheer survival.
Which brings us to Section 4, Adapting to the Machine. How exactly did the machine age rewrite our social ecology? Let's check out the action and the massive reaction. Okay, let's break down how deeply machines actually changed us. Directly, technology shoved us into giant factories that forced a strict division of labor and sparked this huge wave of rapid urbanization. But indirectly, the shockwaves were arguably way bigger. It totally reorganized our social hierarchy, creating the capitalist, middle, and working classes. It caused massive unemployment as machines replaced human hands. It even fractured the traditional multi-generational joint family into much smaller nuclear families, completely rewiring how we live together.
The human cost of that shift was absolutely massive. We essentially traded in those intimate, close-knit rural relationships for highly formal secondary relationships in sprawling cities. The machine era introduced a level of artificiality and intense economic competition that completely rewrote our day-to-day human interactions.
And finally, Section 5, the roots of agriculture. This is where we hit the final side of our triangle. It's the place where nature, culture, and technology physically intersect right there in the dirt. Despite all of our crazy technological advancements, this statistic from India's agricultural sector is just staggering. Only 41% of their cultivable land is irrigated. That means a whopping 59% is still entirely dependent on the monsoon rains. So for all our fancy machines, the vast majority of food production in this massive nation is still completely at the mercy of the natural climate. No rain, no food.
And because of that massive reliance on the climate, dry agriculture is incredibly important. It makes up 22% of the country's entire farming area. And it's super concentrated. 60% of it is in Rajasthan, and another 20% is in Gujarat. This basically proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the physical environment still firmly dictates the economic reality for millions and millions of people.
You can actually trace the entire timeline of human adaptation right out there in the fields. It goes from ancient, brilliant methods like Uttara multi-cropping, where farmers maximize the soil by planting a second crop before the first is even harvested, all the way to modern wet agriculture, and finally, commercial farming. That modern commercial farming is entirely driven by globalization, heavy mechanization, and chemical fertilizers. It marks this massive shift from simple subsistence to a completely profit-driven ecology.
So ecology, technology, and agriculture are locked in this constant spinning dance. Together they dictate where we live, how we work, and who we even consider family. As we look at our own modern lives, totally immersed in screens and facing rapidly changing climates, we have to ask ourselves, how are our newest tools reshaping our own invisible social ecology right now? Definitely something to keep in mind the next time you pick up your phone or even just check the weather. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.